Detroit business. Thanks for joining us tonight for the Walsh Giving Day exclusive event 2020 What's Next? Look at markets, economy, and the elections. This event is the second in a series of engaging, thoughtful discussions about relevant issues that concern us, and we feature some of the best and brightest minds in our community. At Cranes, I cover politics, public policy, and the revitalization of Detroit. I've been a political reporter full-time in Michigan for about 8 years now, native of Chelsea, and worked as a political reporter outside of Michigan for a couple years in Missouri and Delaware before that. I'd like to start by thanking the Walsh College Foundation for its generosity, as well as other donors who have made the events possible. At Walsh, learning is a lifelong opportunity, and the college is grateful for those who support their mission. Today is Walsh's inaugural Giving Day, and throughout the day, Walsh staff, faculty, and alumni have been celebrating the college community and raising their virtual hands to donate and support student emergency assistance, scholarships, tutoring services, and more. I'm told that they have raised more than $56,000 today. This generosity will have an immediate and lasting impact on the lives of these students. If you haven't had the opportunity to make a gift yet, we'd encourage you to do so by visiting walshcollege.edu/giving day and join in making a gift. I am honored now to and pleased to introduce our two guest speakers, Dr. John Moore. He's the chairman and professor of the finance department at Walsh. John has worked for over 25 years in the private sector, including serving as chief financial officer for a large international property holding real estate corporation, but before joining the faculty at Walsh. He is a well-respected subject matter expert in economic history and policy, and has served as the president of the board of the Economic and Business History Society. Dr. Moore has earned several degrees from Walsh, the University of Notre Dame, and Wayne State University, and he is also a certified public accountant. Also joining us tonight is Leon LaBrecque. He is the Chief Growth Officer for Sequoia Financial Advisors, a wealth management firm. Leon is the longstanding and respected member of the financial community, where he has had accomplishment of being an attorney and a certified public accountant, certified financial analyst, and certified financial planner. He is the chairman of the Michigan Association of Certified Public Accountants, Special Task Force on New Tax Legislation, and a board member on the Troy Chamber of Commerce, trustee with the Hazel Park, Michigan Promise Zone, as well as a regular contributor to Forbes.com. John and Leon will be covering a range of topics today, including the state of the economy, including the current inflation vector, federal balance sheet, federal debt trajectory, which we all know is going up, potential deficit solutions, and other relevant topics ahead of this momentous presidential election we have this coming fall. We could not ask for two more seasoned and knowledgeable professionals to lead our discussion here today. This session is being recorded for other members of the Walsh community, and that the mute button is on for all participants, just an FYI. To ask a question during the session, please use the chat function to send your message. I will be monitoring that and checking that, and we'll try to get to these questions. We've got an hour and a half. We've got plenty of time to cover a whole lot of ground. Gentlemen, let's start off. Give me both start with John, your 2-minute kind of overview of the state of the U.S. and Michigan economy right now.
Well, thanks, Jed. I think for starters, obviously we're in the midst of this COVID-19 situation that has, at least in certain parts of the country, locked the economy down. One of the things that Leon and I talked about when we were on stage about 3 months ago is the timing and the damage to the economy. What's the impact going to be? And I'll simply start off by saying that I think that the economy in short term is poised to rebound quite quickly. And I think the foundational principle that I rest that upon is, while COVID-19 is a tremendous problem and a public health hazard, and we need to deal with it, functionally our workforce is going to be intact. The infrastructure is in place, and so all the prerequisites to return to normal, which we certainly hope is sooner rather than later, are in place.
Leon, can you talk a little bit about where you see the economy globally here, and also tell us about the Fujairah effect?
The Fujiwara effect is when two cyclonic storms converge at the same time. And if we take a break from watching election stuff, we can watch the Weather Channel, and you can see two cyclonic storms hitting Lake Charles, Louisiana right now. When two storms hit each other, Fujiwara effect, something we only can talk about once in a decade. It'll be one of those little weird things we only talk about once. But when Fujiwara effect happens, two cyclonic storms hit each other and they cause a third storm. They cause a third effect. And we're looking at the COVID storm and the election storm converging on each other. And I think we're going to see a difference. I think we're going to see a difference. And John and I will probably want to talk about where retail is going. And we'll want to talk about where hospitality and travel is going. And we're going to talk about where technology is going. I mean, right now, Chad, 6 stocks are 23% of the S&P 500. They're all of the positive return. If I pull them out, the S&P's return is about -8%. So we're having a secular recovery. I happen to think we are leaning toward a W on infection vector and a W toward recovery vector. And I just can't wait to talk to my good friend, John, who's one of the smartest men I know. By the way, I want to thank everybody who's been donating to Walsh. I will be making a donation at the end of our talk tonight, as long as John doesn't beat me up too much. I'll be making a donation as well. I'm a big time supporter of Walsh College, and for all our students out there, thank you so much. And for our faculty, our dedicated faculty, thank you for being on and taking care of our students. This is probably the most important time. If I had to pick, Chad, the one profession to be in coming out of 2020 is a CPA. You ought to be a CPA because they changed every single rule in the world. They added 3-letter words all over the place that none of us had heard of before. PPP, QIP, NOL, and now we're back instead. So you were going to go into supply chain, skip that. Go be a CPA now.
Well, Leon, by the way, thank you very much for the pledge of donation, because I'm in the classroom on a fairly regular basis, and let me tell you, the generosity of a number of people makes a big difference with students who really can use the support and really have the opportunities to change our society for the better. So thanks.
Great, no problem. Love the college, John.
Well, let's talk about public policy issue here of the stimulus that we already have had injected in the economy. You brought up PPP. We obviously had this robust unemployment benefit that expired at the end of July, and then we also had the stimulus checks, all of which in Michigan, I just saw this, state economists basically say that may have helped, keep the economy afloat and keep consumer spending going. What have you seen, or what do you take away from how they worked out, and do we need more stimulus coming from Congress here?
Well, I'll tackle that first, Leon, and then you can have at it. But certainly, PPP fulfilled a function because we know from the unemployment numbers and from the downturn in GDP that this was a massive event. But there are some consequences to that. One of the things that employers have noticed is it's hard to get people to come back to these low-paying jobs. It's a whole lot easier to be on relief. But I think that it's going to be hard for us to wean off of that in any significant way short term. Politicians are going to be pressured to keep it going, and perhaps it's at a gradually decreasing rate. But long term, I think there are consequences to this. I think one of the issues that nobody likes to talk about this in political conventions or debates, but the national debt is an issue, and this is a problem with the increase in the national debt.
You're talking to a debt hawk here. I thought I was the only one. Thank God there's two of us left that
right.
The debt going through the absolute sky. John, I'll pop some slides on, hopefully if we get time, and talk about how debt GDP ratios hit the levels of 1946, which is when we had a little tiny tax rate, which I'll ask our listeners if they can figure it out. I'll give a Starbucks card to anybody who can tell me what it is. And not you, John, because you already know what it is. But Chad, I worked on the PPP for the Michigan Association of CPAs in great detail. In fact, I actually did the state's website for them on behalf of the MICPA. John's correct. The PPP was an effective way of getting money back in the system in terms of the thought. The execution was, to say the least, a little bit challenging. They changed the rules 43 times and they're still changing them. In fact, we're still up in the air about whether the expenses are deductible along with PPP. The stimulus on the unemployment made some sense a little bit, but I want you to think this out. If I was a student who graduated from Walsh and I was going off and being, I don't know, let's say a CPA, and I got laid off or furloughed, and I was making $48,000 a year, I had student loans, my student loans were in abeyance. They were in forbearance. I didn't have to pay them. And at the same time, I didn't have to pay Social Security taxes. And at the same time, under Michigan, I was making $56,000 a year. So, I mean, my nephew was making $937 a week not working, and he was making $450 a week working. And he said, "Oh, what do you think I should do, Uncle Leon?" He's going off to buy 4-wheel drives and, calls this. So I said, "Save the difference. Save the difference, dude. You're going to need it." And so it's a different thing. We did a remarkable job of filling the hole. We did an unremarkable job of figuring out how to solve the infection vector. I think we were dismal at that. And if we had done maybe what China or Japan or Italy did, and Italy didn't do a great job, Germany did it, Canada. If we'd have started out at the very beginning and said to everyone, "Stay home and we'll pay you," okay, that would have probably been a logical thing. And stay home for 4 weeks and we'll pay you. And if you have a business, keep your business open and we'll pay the rent and we'll pay your lights and keep the lights on. And everybody stay home and we won't infect each other. It probably would have had a better effect. Of course, that's a quarterback looking backwards. I'll give Jerome Powell an A right now, John. I think as a Fed chair, he gets an A. I could give him an A+, I give him an A+, but I'm an old Walsh grad, old Walsh professor, so no A+. But I'd give Powell a definite A for his support and his way of filling this hole. So, Chad, we filled the hole. We filled it in a lot of weird ways. Yeah, we had things happen, the basketball teams getting PPP loans and hedge funds getting PPP loans. But the intent was there, and we did fill that economic gap. And, luckily our GDP suffered a gigantic decline. I'll agree with John, it'll come back. John, I'm going to ask you, I bet you unemployment resides out at 7 or 8% when we're done with this. It's not going to go back to 3.
No, it's not. And here's the reason why. This has created a perfect excuse. I talked earlier about how companies have their infrastructure in place and they have the labor capacity, the labor talent available to them. But this is the perfect cover for these companies to start figuring out where they can generate efficiency. So I do not see all the people that lost their jobs in early 2020 getting them back, because I think part of it is technology, and you start to find when you trim companies, especially in an environment where technology gains are somewhat rapid, you're going to find opportunities to get by with a few less people, but that opens issues too. I want to talk about that later tonight at the appropriate time. But we do have some issues in our economy now with what I'll call skilled workers versus unskilled workers, and this crisis in 2020 is going to exacerbate that problem, because unskilled labor in today's world there's a lot of jobs for really skilled labor. So this is a pitch for a Walsh College education team out there that's listening. But those who have skills that they can bring to the table in this information economy are in high demand. But unskilled labor is continuing to have smaller and smaller venues to be useful.
I have a client in robotics, John, and they're booming right now.
And AI.
Yeah, AI and booming. They're just saying, okay, we don't need a $15 an hour person. We got a robot that'll do it for $4 an hour and do it 24 hours a day and doesn't take a break and wants just 110 volts.
Do you think? I mean, we're doing this from our home studies, just because we work in information age jobs or the information sector jobs where we can do this from wherever. But what do we need to do to accelerate, get more people, educated back into these pipelines? If their job in the manual labor markets or service tech sectors are no longer going to exist.
Well, that's a challenge. I mean, obviously, one of the things that we're celebrating today is Walsh trying to create scholarship funds for students that have that desire. But you also have to have a desire and a preparatory education. This starts at grade one. When you talk about the jobs that are, well, Leon, here's a good example. The field of accounting. We're obviously both well versed in that corner of the world, but if you need critical thinking and people who are well versed in areas like tax, estate planning, things that really require some intellectual firepower, those jobs are in high demand. But when I got out of school, there are a lot of bookkeepers and bank tellers and people hitting 10 key adding machines. We have one of those at Walsh College in a shelf. It's kind of like a museum piece. But those were a ton of jobs not more than a generation ago, and those are being displaced. And so there's two issues. You have to create access for people to get educated, but you also have to have people that want to get educated, and those people actually have to have the intellectual curiosity and the drive to do it. And so one part is creating access. The other is what choices people make.
John, you're so right. I took the CPA exam and we couldn't even use a calculator, so I had to add up all the numbers. So I remember you did too, probably. I used to teach at Henry Ford Community College before I taught at University of Detroit. And I remember putting up a slide on the thing and adding up all the numbers. And the students are going, "How'd you do that?" I go, "What?" They said, "How did you add all those numbers up?" I go, "I added them up." They said, "But you didn't have a calculator." I go, "Yeah, I added them up." I go, "You just add them up." And they go, "How do you add them up?" I go, "You take the numbers and add them together and you get the bottom number." I talk about the Uberization of accounting, John. I mean, think about how different it was back in the old days. I was an Arthur Andersen auditor, and we had all these papers and work papers and everything else. And I think now we're getting blockchain's giving us self-fulfilling transactions. But I'm seeing data analysts. I'm seeing audit teams having an auditor and a data analyst and some other people. But where I really see the benefit is where we get into, AI is not going to replace us for a while, because we will be able to still think and think out, and we're going to be able to think around the rules that we make. The interesting part was, if these rules were natural law rules, they were organic chemistry, sooner or later AI would get around it. But as long as humans are creating the rules, we'll be okay to do it. I don't know if you guys ever played Madden, but you can cheese Madden. You can play, if you play Michael Vick in Madden 04, you play Michael Vick 500 times in a row, you're invincible, because Michael Vick by the AI is the superior player, and he becomes the superior player. I see all of these things changing, and it's so amazing. I mean, John, at Walsh, think about the top 10 jobs today compared to the top 10 jobs even 10 years ago, or much less than you're in my case, 40 years ago. And it's just totally different, Chad. I mean, when you graduated from college, which is probably a lot less than when John and I did, although John has been going forever. I would say, when I was around, CPA was a great big thing, and there wasn't much of an alternative. I think the CMA was a brand new thing, and that was it. There was no such thing as a data analyst or anything else in that category. Now it's completely different. It's Uberized. We're Uberizing all service businesses, and that's maybe something interesting we should talk about as well.
Well, speaking of Uber, this pandemic has scared away drivers. It's scared away riders. You had an entire, economy that built up around that. Do you think that this is going to accelerate autonomous vehicles development, or the desire for it to have them from the consumer standpoint?
Boy, I love this topic, John. You want to go first? You want me to go? You just hit a sweet spot for me.
It would be nice if we could have that technology be commercially viable soon. It's within sight. It's not imminent. In the interim, again, I'm a historian. The Black Death eventually ended. You can go through a whole host of events that were far more significant than COVID-19, as bad as it is.
We eventually stopped making buggy whips.
Exactly. But that Uber economy, taking Uber specifically, the minute that we start to travel again, Uber is going to be up and running and doing great, except in California because they're regulating that away. But in most of the lower 48, it's gonna work out just fine. And I think to Leon's point, you're gonna, this is pushing out ahead by a number of years, but you can start to see more and more individuals, who are highly skilled, working from their house and working for 4 or 5 different employers on a peak basis. It happens in certain industries already, but I think it's going to become more and more prevalent that people are going to be setting up business for themselves and simply aligning their talents with a portfolio of customers. I don't know what your thoughts are about that, Leon, but.
Well, I want to start with your California point, and that is that Uber and a lot of gig economy workers are going to be harmed by this employment thing, the California trend. So I could see the election. One of my Fujihara effects could be, depending on which party was in charge, you could get a minimum wage increase, or you could get much more of the gig economy workers not being self-employed. And, not to bore everybody with CPA speak, but boy, Chad, if you're an Uber driver and you're self-employed in Michigan versus an Uber driver in California where you're an employee, the difference is profound. It's something you use called 199 CAP pass-through, and you've got certain self-employed things you can do, and you can set up your own 401k plan. I mean, literally, Chad, I could make it so if you were an Uber driver here in Michigan, you gross 40 grand, I could have you pay almost no taxes. You're in California, you're stiffed. I mean, you're going to pay between 12% California tax and self-employment tax, 40-50%.
And I'll make this point. I think that California, in terms of their intervention with Uber, is trying to apply 20th century mindset to address 21st century innovation.
Which is ironic, don't you think?
Yes. California is moving into the past because they're really looking at from a very rigid 20th century industrialized economy mindset.
Yeah, it's weird.
That's not what we are.
The most advanced state technologically, or one of the most advanced, is exactly moving backward. Chad, to your point on AV, automated vehicles, and I call it AV and AEV. I see two different trends. First of all, I see electric vehicles are absolutely here to, they're going to be here. And we're now seeing things like software as service and batteries as service, BaaS, where in China, you can actually just stop at a filling station and get a new battery. So it solves the problem with the infrastructure. You pay $143 a month and you can get unlimited batteries. So you pull your car in, they put a new battery in, and you go on your way, and you never have to replace the battery or charge it up. So it's an interesting play on how that works. I'm curious to see if that's going to work out. They're trying to make a universal battery. Right now, if you buy a Tesla Model 3, it'll park itself, and they can turn on. Most people don't know this. In the last hurricane in Florida, Tesla turned on all the cars and they powered the power grid. So Tesla cars are actually batteries. Imagine, and most people, if you have a Tesla, you think I'm just cool because I can drive really fast in this electric slot car. But in reality, you're not only that, you're really cool, and you're also potentially being good for the environment. Potentially, I say, because if you own a Tesla and you live in Marysville, you got a coal-powered car. But at the same time, you are able to, be on the power grid. How far AEV goes, how far autonomous vehicles go, another story. I think it'll be a while. I think there'll be, I'm hard pressed to say I'm going to drive my pickup truck out to Metamora and pick up a load of hay with my car driving it. It's not going to do it, and it's not going to go off road, and it's not going to do some of the other things. And I think the safety issue is going to come into play. That won't displace Uber, but I want everybody to think about this, all our listeners to think about this. One of the most gigantic changes in all history of all technology was a technology disruption that took 95% of an industry and knocked it off and put it away. And that was this gigantic disruption, this huge technology thing called a tractor. And when they put tractors in, they got rid of the horse, the ox carts and everything else. And everybody goes, oh, those poor farmers will have nothing to do. Yeah, they'll move to the cities and build cars, and they'll move to the cities and become college professors, and they'll do a whole bunch of other stuff. So, I always follow the water theory. I think John taught me this. Economy is like water. It will go somewhere. It doesn't disappear. Even if it evaporates, it comes back down again. So we always get it. We always get something. You lose something, you get something. It isn't a win-lose game. It's a win-win-lose game. You lose something, you win two things. So I think AEV away, EV for sure. And I do say the Fujihara effect on California going backwards. We could see other states do that as well.
Okay. Leon, you got a deck you want to show us. We'll go through some numbers. Can we do that now?
Sure. Love to. Love charts. Got to do my charts. Yeah. How can you be a professor if you don't have charts?
I agree.
Yeah, I knew you would.
much to my students' dismay.
So, and look, they've got good pictures of us, John, instead of the way we actually look.
I like it.
I do too. So let's start with COVID cases. I'm using a lot of June 30th data because I don't have the next quarter data. The cases, of course, have gone way off the chart in terms of, when I did this chart, it was 127,000 fatalities, 172,000 now. We do see, if by looking at the right-hand side of the chart, the change in confirmed cases ranked up, it shot down, and it shot back up. The fatalities, though, if you notice, have not shot back up in terms of the confirmed cases. We're seeing the infection vector in a W. We are not seeing the fatality in a W. And by the way, since I put these charts together now, going through the last month and most of August, we're also seeing that same thing. Confirmed cases actually now are dropping off, and fatalities are significantly dropping off as well. Here's what
we are accepting college campuses from that observation, by the way.
Yeah, especially University of Alabama, right? That's yeah. I wonder why. College kids never get together, John, and they always social distance and are always responsible.
Yes, they do.
Here's a chart from a college you and I have heard of called the University of Michigan, and I'm showing the consumer sentiment index. You notice we had the same kind of thing. The sentiment index followed the infection index. It fell off a cliff. European and Japan went up, and now what we see is the U.S. Consumer Sentiment Index has popped back down. It's giving me a little bit of pause of saying maybe we're in a W. I might have said to us 3 months ago that we were in a V-shaped recovery, but I think potentially we are in like we could be in a W-shaped recovery. In fact, I think we are, and the good news is it looks like the W is starting to trend down again. The fatalities, here we go. You can see again, Europe, Canada, Japan all have a control over their fatalities went down. Their fatalities went down, stayed down. U.S. Popped back up toward the end of July. Again, not anywhere near the level it was in April, not anywhere it was any prior, but we do have that respike coming with people coming out of, seclusion. Interesting thing is some high frequency economic activity. I wanted to see what things look like, so I popped in mortgage applications, and I popped in dinners and TSA travelers and directions on GPS because that's what I rely on all the time in global flights and hotel occupancy. And no big surprise on some of these. I'm not surprised that, global flights are down 30%, but they were down 64%. It's all a matter of perspective. So if I'm looking at it from a perspective standpoint, global flights are actually double where they were in the minimum. TSA traveler traffic was down 96%, and now it's only down, and this is June 30th, so now it's only down about 65%. Purchase money mortgage applications, though, up 15%. Now they're up even higher. John, I was looking at the numbers. They're off the chart for July. They were off the chart. 12% increase in home sales. Biggest increase in history of the United States. Biggest increase ever in history of the United States.
Yeah, I will interject there. If there's anybody in the audience who needs to refinance right now or has the opportunity to refinance, you will never see it better. Jump on now.
By the way, can I take umbrage with Susie Orman, even though I like Susie? Susie just published a great article about go refinance, saying same thing you did. And then she's saying, don't be stupid, go get a 15-year mortgage. And I'm gonna write an article for Forbes. In fact, I was kind of working on it a little bit when I was fooling around before we got on today. Mine is go refinance and go get a 30-year mortgage. And people go, but the 15s are cheaper. I go, well, I know that. But you can always turn a 30-year into a 15, but you cannot turn a 15 into a 30.
Absolutely correct.
And I just
totally
popped every, yeah. John, remember any time when interest rates were above zero? Chad, remember any times when interest rates were above zero? I remember making 5% of my savings account as a little kid. So
hopefully if you're an astute investor and you're getting in effect debt capital in your private portfolio by mortgaging at these very low rates, hopefully you can earn a lot better money on it than what you're paying on your mortgage.
The increase in home prices in Southeast Michigan right now is about 10%. The average price on a 15-year standard mortgage is about 2.575%. You take the deduction on taxes that you could get from that. If it's a deductible mortgage, you're looking at about 1.9. So you're actually making money. You got a negative payment in effect on there. So it's just an interesting thing. Last piece on this chart is driving direction usage. People are going places. That's up 36% versus down 47%. So we're seeing some high frequency economic activity as well. I thought we'd take just a look at the S&P back to 96 because everybody goes, oh, the S&P is at an all-time high and is at the all-time low. And, we tend to try to look at things too short term, in my humble opinion. So, go to 96, take 96 to the year 2000, and we got this magnificent rise. I mean, the stock market went up 106%. It hit 15, you know, the S&P 500 hit 1527. And then the dot-com bubble burst and we saw it drop down 49%. And I mean, if you go up 100 and drop down 49, guess where you're at? You're back to where you started, basically. So back to October 9th, 2002, now you're back down to 777. Now it goes up 101%. Now we learn a new lesson in math. By the way, look at the irony of that, John. It goes October 9th, 07 to October 9th, to October 9th, 02 to October 9th, 07. We get a 100% increase. And then it drops 57%. Now, new math lesson. If it goes up 100 and goes down 57, you're worse than you were when you started. So then it drops down to March 9th, 2009, and then it proceeds into one of the longest and best economic rises and stock market rises in U.S. history. In fact, John, I think you and I could attest, it's the best. It's the longest, at least, not necessarily the fastest, but the longest. So we had a 400% increase, and we had February 19th, and the PE ratios were out of sight, and then it dropped about 37%, and then recovered reasonably nicely, as a matter of fact, to the extent that today it hit another record high. Looking at the yields, though, God, in 2000, the Treasury yield was 6.2%, which goes back to why you ought to borrow money on a mortgage at 2.5. Go borrow a 2.5, and someday you may make 6.2 on a Treasury. Go stick the extra money in the Treasury. Same thing. In 07, it was 4.7. In February, it was 1.6. Now it's 0.07. It's actually lower than that. It's 0.06 right now. So the 10 years at 0.06. The dividend yield on the S&P 500 is 1.9. You make more money in stocks than you make in bonds by double, which is what's driving everybody into the stock market, where the index is running into these new gigantic highs. And this is an inflection point. What I think has happened, though, Chad, is I think it's changed the composition. So let's take the 6 biggest stocks in the S&P 500, the FANG-AM, you know, the Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Apple, Microsoft, and Google. If I take those 6 stocks, 23%, they are all up well over double digits. And why? Because as I sit here, there's an Amazon truck driving down my street right now. And I just got through Googling something a few minutes ago. And I don't use Facebook too much, but I did binge watch some Netflix because I was stuck in the house and my wife was going to kill me if I didn't do something other than annoy her. So I had to go watch Netflix and binge watch Yellowstone, which is a good show. So I'm sitting there going through all these different things, and the data and the big data and the big tech is driving this. What's not being driven right now is energy, and what's not being driven are cars, and what's not being driven are some of the other things. So we're seeing a secularity in this S&P recovery. And I would just caution all our listeners today, our viewers, to say, you know, go look at the whole part of the market. Go look at what Tesla's done this year. Tesla hasn't increased their sales that much. Their stock's up 250%. I mean, it's kind of an interesting question. Why? You know, and why is Amazon at the level it's at? Or why is Google at the level it's at? And how much of that is temporary, John, and how much of that is permanent? What do you think? You know, do you think Amazon's rise is a temporary thing? Is it secular, or is it permanent?
Well, I think long term, Amazon has obviously created value, but you know, Amazon doesn't have proprietary technology that necessarily boxes out other competitors. Eventually, there's going to be more entrants into the field, and more companies that are going to take them on in their own space. So I would argue right now that the market is a little bit heady, but as you'll point out, I know we've talked about this before, that isn't necessarily a reason why you should all of a sudden try to make yourself into a market timer. Right. But I would be surprised if there wasn't some sort of flattening of that line over the next 24 to 36 months, regardless of who wins the election. Because again, getting back to my earlier point, our buildup of national debt is going to have some impact in some way, shape, or form in the private sector economy, whether it's at the corporate or the consumer level. And so eventually, that when you have a pinch on economic activity because of overriding or overbearing debt, that's going to change people's consumer habits, and that's going to impact companies' bottom lines.
You know, and we should talk later about the weakening dollar. I think, we're starting to see a trend toward that. You can see emerging markets start to take off. You can see a lot of other spots. So we did do a nice recovery. It wasn't exactly what I call a perfect recovery. If I look at the valuations, by the way, the valuations are well over one standard deviation off. They're way above where they should be. And if you notice the last time, they aren't as bad as they were in 99 in the dot-com bubble. They're nowhere near where they were in 07. So taking a look at these valuations, valuation seems frothy to me. We've been defensive, Chad, in our portfolios. We've backed off equities a bit. So we've lowered our equity exposure. We maybe did it a little bit prematurely, did about a month ago, and we're still going to consider doing it again because the market has given us so much. But I should say the 6 big dogs gave us all kinds of stuff. And the other 494 dogs still are pretty decent looking buys. So we're looking at that as well.
I'll do a quick little interject here, Leon. I'm sure I have some students on this evening from a class I'm teaching this semester, and they just did a little bit of a research and analysis on auto companies, of which I've literally said that Tesla's one, and we're talking about weighted average cost of capital, and so some of that is impacted by the stock price, and
yeah.
An astute finance professional or student in the field, the weighted average cost of capital for Tesla is going to be very dependent on where that stock price is. It's the number you actually have right now for weighted average cost of capital is a little bit artificial because it's dominated by, Tesla's mostly funded by equity, and the stock price is pretty heady right now, in my opinion, based on the cash flow the company's producing.
Well, how about the ludicrous split nonsense? How about this nonsense of the stock split? So the price went through the roof, and I went, oh gosh, that's like I ordered a pizza and it had 4 pieces, but you couldn't eat that much pizza. So you wanted more, so I cut it into 8 pieces. Now you're happy. I mean, it's just like, it's a ridiculous notion. And the market has, I'll go with Warren Buffett. When you don't understand what the market's doing, don't do that. Don't be there. So it's, what did your students find the weighted average cost of capital for Tesla was? I'm eager to hear. I'd love to hear the number.
We'll sit down at breakfast sometime soon. We'll walk through that. There's some teaching moment tied into that whole episode.
So can I do one of my hedge plays on it? Can I hedge? Can I short it against the box and then cover it later with some buy a call and short it against the box? That's my question. So.
Go for it.
All right. I did look a little longer. I went back to see how bad things are. Everything's relative, So here we are, in the shakedown right now, and we're in the 13th. We're in number 13 of our drawdowns. Bad drawdown, 34% drawdown. That's horrendous. Nothing like the crash of 29, which was an 86% drawdown. Nothing like the 37 W-shaped recession we hit. We had a 60% drawdown, and not even like our tech bubble or our global financial crisis. In this case, though, we had a full-blown recession coming through, one of our worst recessions. But if we take a look at the bull market starting afterwards, in every case after a decline, we've had a rise. Now, I might pose we had a lot of that rise already, but this is just a good look at bear markets and subsequent bull returns. Everybody should take a look at my far right-hand line here, and those bull runs averaged 166%. So the average decline in a bear market of every one I pulled off, in a bear market's anything over 20%, so I pulled all the bear markets since 1929. If I take all the average of all those bear markets, average negative 42%, average recovery, 166%. Average duration of the downturn, 22 months, average recovery, 54 months.
So Leah, let me press you with a quick question here, because you're seeing a massive drop in GDP at the time of the Great Depression. And you have a second quarter this year where the GDP actually dropped in a similar level. We lost what, 30-some%
Yep.
in the second quarter. Yet equity markets, which went into full blown panic and retreat back in the late 20s and early 30s, have not done that in this case. Why?
The cavalry, Jerome Powell and the cavalry, they came riding in. They rode in on choppers. They rode in on aircraft carriers. They rode in on fast horses and slow horses and ox carts and everything else, and threw $5 trillion into the hole. So we drew a $5 trillion hole, and we filled the hole back up. And so everyone said, oh, wow, this will be over. And look, everybody didn't get permanently laid off, and all the businesses didn't go under, and we seem to have staved it off. The original idea of the staving it off was an 8-week period. Let's put it on hold for 8 weeks and we'll all be good. And everybody thought that, and I did too. And here we are, what, 16 weeks later? I don't know how long now. I've given up. I don't even know what day is it. Today, Wednesday, John? But I think we're sitting here now looking at it going, oh, the new normal is we have Zoom meetings and we have Zoom classes, and I talk to Chad on Zoom, and Melanie emails me or texts me or Twitters me, and we just got into a whole new pattern. But I would say the cavalry rode in, John. That's the reason it came back so hard. It came back hard because we threw so much stimulus at it.
Okay, so the Cavalry rode in with their $5 billion. We printed all the money. We racked up this new debt. Now, how do we come out of this without having to do more if we are continuing to battle this virus at the levels that we are right now as a state and a nation, and pretty much on the assumption that there's not going to be a vaccine for another 12 months, probably, that's readily available to everybody, every man, woman, and child.
In my opinion, while I agree with Leon about Chairman Powell reacting to the crisis, one of the things that I keep going back to is, okay, that's the short term. We had a crisis. We met it head on, like the Marines and the Special Forces. But what are the long-term consequences? And right now, monetary policy is so loose. Number one, if we have another crisis, I don't know where the Fed's going to find a lot of dry powder. You can go to negative interest rates. They're trying it in other countries. I'm not sure that's a great idea. But if we get any sort of velocity on the money supply right now, because the velocity has been low for the past decade plus, even though our monetary policy has been quite loose. If you look at the Fed reports, the Federal Reserve economic database, the M supply is growing rapidly, and so if you get any sort of velocity because of consumer confidence or business activity, you're going to have inflation. And I would love that, because I'm turning into an old timer. You have to be a certain age to remember what to do when there's high inflation. There's a small number of us that were still alive when that last happened, and we're going to become incredibly valuable as consultants.
John, what's the current velocity? About 2.8 or something like that? In low twos. When we were around back in the 80s, it was what, 8 was the normal? Yeah. It was what it was running at. I didn't mean to put everybody into a type of a problem here, but I put on the Fed balance sheet. I couldn't resist. I knew John would talk about the Fed because he operates a Fed base book. Here's the Fed balance sheet. Just have a look at the monster this Fed balance sheet is. The Fed balance sheet, if you go back to 07, it looked like it went through the roof. I mean, if we were talking about in 07 and 09, 08, and 09, we go, oh my God, the Fed's thrown QE1 and QE2 and QE3, and they have $2 trillion on their balance sheet. We would have been all bent out of shape about it. And John and I, the debt hawks, would be going, how are we going to pay for this? This is dismal. And then we got off into the 12s and 13s, QE3, and we kept on going, and we kept doing MBSs and treasuries. And now when we get into the crisis now, look at the monster. We have this monster of a balance sheet that's just unbelievable. We have, basically, $3 trillion sitting on certain parts of the balance sheet, loans, outgoing. I mean, it's a crazy balance sheet in the grand total of $8 trillion. And if John's correct, and I believe he is, if we start getting inflation kicking up, which I wouldn't be, amazed if Chairman Powell doesn't say, you know what, inflation isn't going to be all that bad. We're going to have a little bit of inflation. I think we could see the inflation hawks go away out of the Fed. You could see that velocity go up to 3 or 4. You're going to now see some real things start kicking up. You'll see inflation kick up, I think. John?
And Leon, I will affirm that you should only give Chairman Powell an A, but here's one area where I would criticize the Fed a bit. The fact that they've continued to broaden their forms of intervention, and the fact that the Federal Reserve was going into private sector market and acquiring private sector securities, I find to be very troubling.
Yeah. And what's that do to the junk bond market, the junk bond spread? The bond spreads are nuts. I mean, I'm looking at junk bonds. I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole right now. Junk stocks, now I'd buy. But show me a junk bond. I'm not that interested. And in fact, an interesting play I'm looking at a little bit is do we go find companies that are in the BBB rated that have really narrow spreads? In other words, really good bad rated companies and go look at their stocks. Is that a better way to play? But I just think this balance sheet is crazy right now. And Chad, you're talking to two debt hawks. So we'll go back and say, you got to pay for this sooner or later. You're going to pay for it with inflation. You're going to pay for it with taxes. You're going to pay for it with cutting spend, something. Or you're just going to, if you just print more money, you're going to keep building this balance sheet, and you're going to hit that velocity sooner or later. So it is a little ominous.
Yeah, and Chad, Leon hit it right on the head. You really have two major options as this debt bomb continues to increase. It's inflation or taxes, and neither one are very pleasant.
So here's a chart of U.S. GDP per capita PPP and the debt to GDP ratio. Here's World War II, where you could see the economy is the black line, and it rose nicely. And then we had a recession coming out of that at the end of World War II. And then, but we had the debt ratio spike up to 126% of GDP, which, as I recall, as memory serves, is exactly where it is right now. If I flop that to top tax brackets, the tax bracket in 1945 was 94%. In fact, the tax bracket coming out of the last crisis in 1918 hit 75%. During the Great Depression, some genius had a great idea that in 1932, let's raise the tax bracket back up to 65%, teach those rich people to jump out of windows during the stock market crash. And then it continued to rise throughout the 30s and 40s until it got to that 94% level. When you get taxes at 94%, a couple of things happen. Number one, people figure out ways to get around them. They hire more CPAs. That's a plug for being a CPA or a tax attorney. And number two, they move and they go somewhere else and they find some other way to get out of it. We've had the benefit of taxes going down since then, and we've grown our way out of it. I mean, the roaring 20s brought the tax rate down dramatically, mainly because we had great prosperity going on. We had it go down during the 70s when we had prosperity. We had it go down during the 90s when we had more prosperity. But it is a possibility as we have faced this election that we could see some significant tax increases. That's a distinct possibility. So I'm glad you brought up the tax rate, John, and I'm glad, Chad, you brought up the debt ratio, because I think it's critical. That debt ratio is just, it's astonishing. There's a theory out there that I don't buy, and I don't think John buys, called modern monetary theory, which says you just print the money. France tried that, and it didn't work very well, and a few other countries tried that. And when you have just paper money that doesn't have anything behind it, sooner or later the emperor has no new clothes. And
Zimbabwe didn't have much success with that experiment.
I have $100 trillion Zimbabwe note. I paid $13 for it on eBay. 100 trillion, I think it's 100 trillion pounds. So if you ever want to go, John, I'll buy you a drink. We'll go.
Okay.
Drinks all around. In fact, all the people on the call will just all fly over Zimbabwe, and I'll leave, a couple trillion as a tip, and we'll be good. Yeah. So I think inflation could be an issue we'll be talking about. If we're doing this a year from now, which I hope we are, and I hope we're doing this and having a better giving day, because we're talking about how things are going great and our students are doing great, and we're going to have more scholarships and all those things. We could be talking about, hey, John, remember we talked about inflation being gone? Now it's back, and it's coming back in spades. So I think we ought to look for that, Chad.
What sensible tax policy do you think would make sense for addressing the debt? That if you coming out of this crisis, someone makes an argument, a political argument that the bills come due, and you can no longer just keep spending unlimited amount of money, either bailing the economy out or pumping into social programs or pumping it into the military. What tax policy could change in your mind that could be tweaked in a way that wouldn't send us into a scenario where everyone's running off and trying to stuff their money in offshore islands?
Well, Leon, I think you have a little bit of analysis in your slide deck about some of the tax proposals. So this is probably a perfect time for you to walk us through that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would be a good time to talk about that. I would like to start with just a little story. So my mom, who just passed a couple of years ago at 96, was a Depression era baby. And my mom was going through this, whole thing complaining about taxes and X and Y and Z. And I suggested that my sister, who didn't pay much taxes, as a matter of fact, didn't pay any taxes because she was retired, and my sister's kids, who didn't pay any taxes, were all gaining benefits of the government. and that I was paying lots of taxes. And she was saying, we should tax rich people. And I go, not that I'm a rich person, but I'm going, well, let's figure this out. Let's suppose all of us go to dinner. So let's suppose there's 10 of us and we all go to dinner. And we say, all right, let's split the check. So how do we split the check? Well, if there's 10 of us, we can split the check 10 ways. But somebody says, well, John's a college professor. He makes a lot more money than everybody else. So John should pay more of the check. So we come up with an agreement that Leon will pay $10, Chad will pay $10, 7 people will get free dinner, and John will pay $80 because it's a $100 bill. So then the waiter comes back and says, oh, I overcharged you. Here's $10 back. And everybody goes, well, oh, so who gets the $10? And everybody goes, we each get $1. Right? That's kind of the current mentality of the country, is that no, everybody should get everything, but the rich people should pay all the taxes. So, and I'm not going to be too critical of the Biden plan, but the Biden plan basically says, well, all the rich people should pay all the cost of all this, even though the portion of being out, what's out there has been shared pretty much equally by the whole country. I would suggest that the COVID crisis has been, PPP loans didn't go to rich people generally. The unemployment PUA didn't go to rich people. It basically helped people, for the most part, who needed it. Mortgage forbearance helped people who needed it. I think that's an important thing. I agree that the aid should have gone to the people who needed it. I disagree that the cost should go strictly to the people on the upper echelon of the income stream. So Chad, you asked the question of what would be fair. If you wanted my version of fair, would be a sales tax. Call it a debt reduction tax or call it whatever you want, but all the developed countries in the world have some kind of a value-added tax. It's based on consumption. You buy something, you pay tax on it. It's okay. You live in the society. You drive on the roads. You do everything else. My mother was complaining about things. I go, Mom, you have the benefit of the court system in the state of Michigan. You have the benefit of the roads in Michigan. You have the benefit of, all the things in Michigan that are good. You have the tourism. You have all the things that benefit in Michigan. Why aren't you willing to pay your fair share? And maybe on the smaller end, you don't have to pay as much, of course, but pay a little bit. If you go buy a bowl of cherries, then pay some tax. If you go buy a bottle of wine, pay some tax. So that's the end of it. Biden's plan is to apply a lot of taxes on the upper end. And if you'll notice the chart, and I took this right off of, where it came from the Biden campaign, he wants to add a payroll tax on anybody who makes above $400,000, all the way to the top, 12.4%. So if you're making earned income above a certain level, you're going to pay 12.4% more on top of your income tax rate. Corporate income tax rate goes up to 28%. Down, it was 35%, went down to 21. The top rate in the itemized limitation, top rate goes back up to 39.6. By the way, that doesn't bother me. And no deductions for anybody in the upper rate. Taxing capital gains as ordinary income. I actually disagree with that, but if you have more than $1 million of adjusted gross income and you don't get a step up in basis, and you have to pay ordinary income rates on your capital gains. And then real estate, John, you wouldn't like that. Commercial and multifamily real estate, they're going to have an extra tax. They're going to raise the global intangible tax. They're going to phase out the tax rates for deductions to people above 400, and then they're going to throw a 15% minimum tax on book income. It's a $4 trillion tax increase, which is opposed to the $1.5 trillion tax cut of Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Well, and Leon, what really causes me concern about this slide is, we can drill down on the details. If you look at the bottom line, we're bringing in, $4 trillion of additional taxes, but we're spending $6 trillion more in government structured expenditures. That continues us along the road of this debt bomb, and I think that if there's a certain amount of stickiness to a nationality. It may be a little more challenging, although people can offshore their money from the United States government. They've done it since the country was founded. But I think if we I hate to pick on California tonight, but states are like petri dishes of policy. You have this broad base of 50 states that all have a certain amount of flexibility in how they approach their own roles within their political boundaries. And California right now is chasing some of the brightest and best in their state. And then you visited California, I visited California. It's a pretty pleasant place if as long as the forests aren't burning. And
And there's no earthquake, and there's
Right,
no,
but you know, I think we all acknowledge it's not a bad place to live. That's why California's population skyrocketed throughout the 20th century. But now you're finding that economic policy and tax burden is chasing people, and you know, they're heading to Texas and Arizona and Idaho and all sorts of other places.
Leon, I wanted to ask you about your sales tax idea. So in 2007, I believe it was, maybe 2006, my memory's foggy. The Michigan legislature passed a sales tax on services. You might recall it was to get the state out of $1 billion budget hole at the time. And it lasted about 4 or 5 weeks. It didn't even get implemented. And infamously, they exempted accountants and tea times and golf courses and lawyers. But the legislature decided to tax baby shoe bronzing and tarot card reading and a whole bunch of just services you never heard of. And I actually looked this up recently. There are billions of dollars of untaxed services every year that we as a state of Michigan do not apply. But basically, what happened was every lobbyist in town, as it's just been described to me, it was the greatest quarter for lobbying in Michigan history. I mean, every lobbyist was fully employed and working overtime to get things out of that bill. And so I bring this subject up. We can't seem to bring ourselves as a state to do this. How could we possibly muster something like this in Washington?
Well, you're talking the LaBrecque plan, which is the national sales tax, which no one else is going to embrace, I'm sure. But
Which why, Leon, you'll never get elected. But
that's true, because I'd have a flat income tax of 17% and a national sales tax, and we'd have everything covered. But if we did it that way, Chad, the argument you have on my version of the argument is, if you don't put a sales tax on services, which because that's an income tax. Sales tax on services is an income tax. So quit calling it something else. You tax income, you tax purchases. However, you take your income and go buy something. So if I take my income and I go to McDonald's, then I bought something. I pay tax on it. If I go, and by the way, McDonald's is a bad example because you shouldn't tax food. But if I go buy, we do it right now. Everybody doesn't even think about it. If you go buy a pack of cigarettes, you pay, I think, $4 a pack in taxes. If you buy a bottle of, good bourbon, you're paying, $10 in taxes. If you buy gasoline, you're paying taxes. So we already have all kinds of national sales taxes. We just don't have a unified national sales tax. If you want to see what one looks like, just go across the border to Canada, go directly south of us, south of Troy, to the first foreign country you hit, and you hit Canada. And go there, and they have 2 sales taxes, a provincial tax and a national tax. And the Canadians seem perfectly happy. And if you're an American citizen, you buy it, you get a refund of the taxes you pay on certain things on the way back. So the sales tax is egalitarian. It goes to everybody who buys things. You tax people who aren't necessarily citizens you tax illegal income as long as they're buying something. And in today's cashless society, just make it easy. It goes right on your credit card. It's just part of the purchase. It's there. Notice the Wayfair ruling had us all start paying taxes on Amazon, and everybody screamed and said, "Oh, no one's going to buy anything online anymore." And Amazon sales have been through the roof. And Michigan's collecting way more taxes now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's probably keeping the school aid fund alive this year.
Wayfair is saving the state of Michigan. Wayfair and pot. Maybe if they just sold pot on Wayfair, then we'd really be okay. So.
Well, don't get me started about how pot is not going to fill potholes in this state. I equate it to the lottery. And I always have to explain to people that the lottery basically runs public schools in Michigan for about 13 days a year. It's not 7% of the school aid fund, and it's not the saving grace. But so this is Biden's plan. What's Trump's plan?
Well, Trump's is to leave things alone. So, the status quo would be to leave estate taxes the way they are, to leave the corporate tax rates the way they are. Trump does want to make permanent some of the tax changes, and he also wants to do some more middle income cuts. I would say the odds of either of those going through directly are low, if you want my humble opinion. Yeah. You'd have to have a blue wave in the Senate, which according to what I'm seeing on the odds right now are about 60%, but that's the betting odds. You'd have to have everyone line up immediately and say, we're going to go do this tax increase. I don't necessarily see that. And to get around Social Security, you'd have to get around the Byrd rule. You'd have to get around the filibuster rule. I really don't see that. I can't see the Senate, breaking one of their own rules to cause the nuclear option to go do that. So I would say in reality, what we'll see is we'll see a trend toward higher taxes. We will probably see some kind of a trend toward some version of tax. I don't think there's much appetite for a value-added tax or a sales tax yet, Chad. It was just my way of interjecting a way that would work. I could make it work. It's relatively simple: 5% national sales tax, plus leave the income tax rates alone, and raise the Social Security wage base up to about 180 grand, and we're probably okay. But that's the CPA talking. So you give me a balance sheet and tell me to fix it, and I'll go, all right, this is what you need to do. So raise the revenue.
You bring up Social Security. I can see Social Security becoming probably a big issue in this election. You got two 70-year-old men running for president. They're never going to be arguing about this. What do we need to do to shore up Social Security and Medicare, in your opinions? Start with John.
Well, ultimately, the only way you can shore it up is to bring revenues in, and this goes again to the fact that government right now is creating an unsustainable model. So you asked Chad about the Trump plan, and then Leon correctly said, hey, it's going to be the status quo. But the Bush administration managed to double the national debt in 8 years in office, and the Obama administration doubled it again in their 8 years in office. And I guess Trump probably gets a great scorecard because in 4 years he's only increased it by 35%. It's still problematic. Again, getting back to what Leon and I talked about before, your only way to continually provide those benefits is to raise taxes or to inflate your way to it. And again, I can remember the 1970s. We don't want to go back there. That was a very unpleasant experience, especially for senior citizens, retirees, and poor people, which you would think would be the last people we'd want to thrust this problem upon.
I'd echo that. I think you're right. If you want to fix it, you got to raise the taxes, and that's the way to fix it. You can't lower the benefits. You could lower the benefits slightly in a couple ways. I don't believe in means testing. I think that's almost unconstitutional. You put your money in, you can't even have your own money back. That's confiscation. So I think you could change the way you compute inflation, which I'm almost certain they will do. They will chain inflation, and they chained inflation in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which telegraphed to me something that almost no senior citizen knows, and that's the difference between chain CPI and regular CPI. But that would lower the amount flowing out. It would lower everybody's benefit. They just wouldn't know it because you don't know what you don't know. So you could chain that out. You'd be hard pressed to change the survivor benefit, but that's kind of silly. If John and I are married to people we like we are, and one of us retires at 70 and then we pass on before 8, doesn't matter. We just pass on. Our spouses can have our benefit, even though they didn't pay in the full amount. In other words, I'm funding my spousal benefit. I think on the Medicare side, Chad, it's the same question of any basic socialized medicine group. You could clearly identify problems in the drug issue. You could identify problems in the billings. I mean, the billings are crazy. Think about our medical system in this country. It's goofy. Imagine if car insurance was like medical insurance. So you're allowed to wreck your car. You can wreck your car. You can run it out of oil. You don't have to change the fluids. You don't have to lubricate it. You don't have to check the air in the tires. You don't have to do anything, and it's taken care of no matter what. That's how we do medical insurance. There's no level of culpability. If I go out and
obesity, all that stuff.
Yeah, like if I'm 400-pound diabetic and I have diabetes and I have to go to the hospital, I can go to the emergency room. It's covered. It doesn't, So there's a lack of culpability, and we don't have people have any. There's no incentive or impetus for people to cut their medical expenses. Might be interesting if we did allow that. If we said, hey, here's what you can do. If you shop and you go to get a better deal and you decide to take the better deal, you can have some of the money back or something like that. Or you have an account, you could use it up. But you're asking a hard social question. My long answer was you could get people to change their behavior, which won't work. My short answer is tax more.
But what are the consequences of increased taxation? You're going to slow down the economy. so there's still a hangover. It's a nice intellectual answer on a drawing board, but it's going to have consequences that I think are not healthy. But I think we're in that trap right now.
We could set off the velocity powder keg, John, and get inflation backed up at 6, and that would do it, because it would be a 6% tax increase on everybody into the higher bracket. And then we'd have to get rid of the Social Security CPI thing. That's what we'd have to do. So we cut off CPI, but we boost inflation. That's the way to get out of it without harming everybody quickly. They'll all just get harmed slowly.
Our new version of a soft landing.
Yeah, for our kids, not us, right?
When the president rolled out, he wanted a payroll tax holiday of sorts, but not really a holiday, just delaying the payment. I did notice that Biden and the Democrats quickly jumped on that, said you're defunding Social Security and Medicare, and it seems like the president and the Republicans, particularly Republicans in Congress, they backpedaled pretty quickly on that idea.
Well, it was a bad idea. It didn't solve any problems. It was such a short period. Even if implemented, I'm not sure how much impact it would have.
Not only that,
it was just a bad idea.
Yeah, it was a bad idea. It was a terrible idea. And in fact, I told clients, don't do it, because if you delay payroll taxes, you still have to pay them. And if you don't pay them, there's a 100% penalty. So if times are bad, you're getting yourself in worse shape, because it's a personal liability. You can't get out of payroll taxes if you don't pay them. You can't go bankrupt. You can't not pay them. You can't even cut an offer and compromise in the IRS on it. You're stuck. So you're playing with a hand grenade. And it's like saying, okay, you can play with a hand grenade. You can pull the pin out and set it around on the table. Just be careful you don't knock it over, because it'll blow the house up. And they'll go, oh, okay, I'll do that. And it'll save you 6.4%. Forget it. Cut your own pay. Do something else. Don't pay your supplier. Do something. Don't always pay the IRS. That's one of the rules of every good tax attorney. Always pay the IRS, because they can take all your stuff. And not anybody else generally can do that except the IRS. They can take all your stuff. So I think it's a dumb idea.
Growing up, I used to think that people that reached high levels of government office had to have naturally been smarter. Over time, I've myself of that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cackle. But
you can create bad ideas at the highest levels of government. Hey, don't get me wrong. They're talented people. Otherwise, they wouldn't get elected to those spots. But you still can have some bad ideas.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Leon, is there some more to your slides you want to show or want to go through?
Yeah. I wanted to calm everybody down a little bit. Everyone's worried. Oh God, the Democrats are going to be the end of the story. Oh God, the Republicans. I mean, remember 2016? We all thought if Trump got elected, the world was going to end, and it didn't. And the theory right now is if Biden is elected, civilization will end, or if Trump is elected, the world will also come to a crashing halt. I went back to 1881, and the rate of return on the stock market was about 6.4%. In the time Democrats controlled it, it was 6.7. In the times Republicans controlled it, it was 9.9. In a split government, it was 14. I actually took that further a couple of years, and I took it to more modern times. More modern times, Republicans did a little better than Democrats. It was about a 16% rate of return in the S&P 500 during Republicans, about 14 with Democrats, about 10 with everybody. This chart just shows how bad or good in different powers. You see there's red lines above and below. There's green lines above and below. Kind of a fun chart to look at is this one, because I love history, and I was going to be on with John, so I had to make something really interesting. So I went back to every president to see who the worst and the best was. So the worst stock market in history was the first administration of Bush. It was absolutely the worst, followed by Thomas Jefferson. So Bush could say he was slightly better than Thomas Jefferson in having a terrible stock market. By the way, the best stock market ever in history was James Madison in his second term, followed by Bill Clinton. And so you had a great stock market. And so, there's some wild comparisons here, but I want you to see the reds and the blues, and you notice there's no real high correlation here. John and I are pattern identifiers, and there's more to it. So as we're all sitting around, here's an interesting one for you. If I took 1961 to 2019, if you invested only under the Republicans, your 10 grand turned into 86 grand. And if you invested only under a Democrat, your 10 grand turned into 376 grand. So there, Biden. See, everybody see. I could see Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. See, we're better. And if you stayed invested through all of them and just sat there, you made 3.2 million. And I just say, look, gang, this is the way we got to look at it. You're still going to have electric vehicles. You're still going to have CRISPR technology. You're still going to have 5G. Everything is still going to keep on going. People want their lives better. They don't really care who the president is at any given point in time in terms of the White House. The president is the president, and they can make us nervous, or they can make us excited, or they can do all kinds of things, but they don't have that big of an effect on capitalism, because I'm an ardent capitalist, and I think John would agree with me. Capitalism wins almost always over anything if it's allowed to flourish. I'm not saying unbridled capitalism, but capitalism wins.
But the key point that you bring up, LaBrecque, is that it has to flourish, and so that, again, I'm harping on it, but is this debt hawk bit. If you end up having an economy where you have to significantly increase taxes or inflate, you're going to stifle those entrepreneurs that otherwise would be doing a whole lot better and producing a lot more for your economy. So, I don't have all the answers, but I think one of the things that has occurred in this first 20 years, first 2 decades of the 20th century is, historically, as recently as 2009, we were at 9 trillion in debt, and now that sounds like a long time ago, and it wasn't that long ago.
And that sounded like a huge number, and now that sounds like a really good number. Yeah. 9 trillion, wow, that's all. That'd be wonderful. That'd be awesome. Chad, we ought to also understand that we're talking about a global world here. I mean, the U.S., we always get this myopia. We tend to look myopically at the U.S. and everything's U.S. and everything's U.S. and we ought to be looking, all of us, at the rest of the world. And what's going to happen to the rest of the world? What's going to happen as the emerging markets come out? What happens, by the way, what happens if the dollar weakens, which I think it's going to? And I think the dollar is going to decline in value just because of this gigantic amount of debt. And I think we are going to see some inflation. And that means emerging markets will probably take off.
Well, and I think another thing that we have not talked about tonight is, like it or not, regardless of who wins the election, there are economic tensions between the United States and China that aren't going to go away based on election results in November. That is an issue that also is going to play into this, because I don't see open trade channels opening up between the United States and China very soon, even if Joe Biden becomes our next president.
I agree with you, and everybody gets, oh, China needs us, China needs us. You know what our total amount of imports to China, that we import from China is? 7% of their GDP. You know what their total amount of consumer spending did last year? Went up 8%. They outspent us. So the Chinese economy is something we ought to be considering on its own. By the way, everybody should go look at how well the Chinese stock market has done this year. The virus started in China, and right now the Chinese stock market's up about 15%. So, I mean, there's an interesting aspect to this whole thing.
Well, and saw that image last week of people partying and or going to a concert in Wuhan, and that's not happening in America this summer.
No, and I think you're seeing the Chinese buying cars and buying everything else, and their Chinese e-commerce has gone through the roof, and probably they're a good microcosm of what we will become. As John and I were talking about Amazon, the version of Amazon over there, the JD.com and the Alibaba, those stocks are going right through the roof. They're doing the same thing Amazon's doing, but in a post-COVID world in China. So we should, we should continue to think globally, despite the fact that we're trying to develop a domestic rhetoric. We should be thinking globally and thinking about what this all means to everyone in the world and where we can do things. I'm bullish in the long term on the global stock markets. I am definitely bullish. And I am bullish about cheap money. I think cheap money is okay. It helps things. I'm also agreeing with John that if we have all this gigantic debt, we have to get rid of it somehow, and that poses inflation. So, when you have all these weird things, it bodes into opportunity. And to make a weird part about it, the Chinese symbol for opportunity is a combination of risk. It's got the Chinese phrase for risk built into it.
Well, and maybe one supplementary comment to what Leon said. There is one other way to solve the problem, and that's to grow your GDP. But again, if if the debt is out of hand and the interest carry on that debt, which right now, remember, we're in a low inflationary economy. If we all of a sudden hit an inflationary economy, that federal debt's going to keep rolling over, and the cost of debt is going to crowd out the federal budget, and we're going to end up inflation because they're just going to have to create money to handle it. But if we can create an a reasonably open free market to entrepreneurs, and I think that's paramount. I think we need to, and I know that's not the rhetoric that's being played, frankly, on either side of the debates right now. But if we can create a very pro-business policy over the next decade, that's going to help solve the problem.
John, one subject we want to get to here before we run out of time is commercial real estate. I'll give this local anecdote. If you owned 3 million square feet of downtown Detroit office space that you spent the last decade spending $2 billion of your personal wealth buying up, how comfortable would you feel about the future, particularly if you have 19,000 people in that office space?
Chad, are you asking this for a friend?
Asking for a guy who just got a lot richer a few weeks ago.
If you can control those 19,000 employees, you have no problem. Because you in effect, downtown Detroit has become a giant corporate campus. And I happen to know a number of folks down there. It's a great place to work. I don't think that there's a big issue in Detroit. I will tell you this, I do think with some of the social unrest going on this summer that you could see other urban areas, and we've been, for the most part, pretty clear of any significant issues with our urban downtown. But there are other cities where I think those cities are in trouble over the next decade. I think that you're going to start seeing companies and employees pull out. And I'll give you an anecdote. A very good friend of mine has a daughter who works out in Seattle for Amazon, and she and her husband they live in downtown Seattle, and she just gave birth to a baby in maybe about a month ago, and this was literally in a very upscale apartment building 3 blocks away from Chaz while the riots were going on, and they moved out 3 weeks later to another location. So I think real estate, there's a lot of moving factors in real estate right now. So urban real estate, Detroit, if you're asking for a friend, I think that friend's in great shape. But again, because he's the landlord and the lessee for the most part. But if you talk about sectors right now, office space in general, the dynamic's going to change. I mean, we're on Zoom right now with an audience. That wasn't feasible 5 years ago, at least commercially. Another anecdotal story. I have a student that did a study with me last semester, and so I don't have any data in front of me, but this is anecdotal. He works for General Motors, and he finished this project for me in June. And he's an engineer for GM, 27,000 engineers. They sent them all home. And he said the internal study of those 27,000 engineers said that their productivity during the second quarter of 2020 went up 10%. And so companies are starting to realize that, hey, I don't have to spend all this money on this space, and I can get greater productivity out of my employees. So certain sectors are going to be adversely impacted. Other sectors are obviously going to benefit.
I mean, Quicken Loans had a record second quarter with everybody selling mortgages from their basement.
But interestingly enough, it'll be interesting again for that company because, and I'm always wrong on this because I keep saying, oh, interest rates can't get a whole lot lower. Sooner or later, I'm going to be right. But
zero.
They are hitting the perfect storm right now. Business could not be better for them. And we should make a plug for United Shore too, since we're being equal opportunity, at least regionally. Any of the businesses in the sector right now are doing great.
And Hall too. I mean, we should just say all the mortgage companies are doing really well, and the rates are low. Lots of people on our chat have been talking about that, John, about how they've refinanced at some of these exceptionally low rates. I was just writing a Forbes article. Like I said, I'm of the opinion right now, go out and grab a 30, pay your old payment, pay higher. And when the rates go back up, put your money in your Roth IRA, do something else with it. It's just,
it's funny because we've been declining for a number of years now. I keep saying every semester to my class, rates are historically low, and it's been true for the last, almost 10 years now.
Right.
But sooner or later, if you, again, Leon, you like to show graphs that show, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. Interest rates right now are truly extraordinary if you look at the long view of history. And so
yeah.
Enjoy it.
You look all the way back to 1803. They're at a low right now. 1803, federal government rates are at a low. It's crazy.
Yeah. Hey, we have a question here about talking about the importance of AI and technology. What do you think will be the risk and challenges for the CPA profession?
Well, so AI. I always have this argument because I have friends who view that AI is going to take over the world. I disagree because AI at its core is algorithms, and boy, they can do things a lot faster than us. And so there's a whole part of the economy where just like machinery, all of a sudden, Leon, your earlier example of a tractor. Well, you know what? It was harnessing machinery during the industrial age, and it did things a whole lot better. So from an accounting profession standpoint, if you want to be a bookkeeper, your job is obsolete already. I'll give you this analogy, because I worked in public accounting for Coopers and Lybrand, for people old enough to remember that. But my first 2 or 3 years out, I was working at a 10 key and writing in pencil on paper and stuff like that. And I learned from mentoring people I worked for 3 years. Let's take a look at cash, and we'll teach you how to look at cash and the ways to look at it, and ways to look at debt and plant and equipment. The challenge right now is people coming out of school and starting in the public accounting profession have to know what it took me 3 years to learn, because all that, I call it Grimble work, all that grunt work that I spent most of my time on my first 3 years in public accounting, it's all gone now because it's all taken care of by automation and computer technology. So if you have critical thinking skills, you've got a job. If you are doing repetitive manual intellectual work, your job's going to be, if it's not going to disappear soon, it's going to eventually disappear.
Leon, any thoughts on that?
I think that we're going to see a vast trend toward data and analytics, so that you're going to have the typical audit team is going to be a lot different. I think the CPA profession is going to change dramatically in that the $800 an hour people are always going to be there, and that the $50 an hour people are going to go away and be replaced by AI and do something else. So I think we'd see that. Our listener also asked about privacy and security. I think that's a vast issue that we should all be looking at. I mean, we are all working from home, but are we all working on secure servers? How are we going to protect those things? And you're going to see a surge. We're already seeing a surge, Chad, in cybercrime and cybersecurity issues. That's going to be massive. And if I was, one of the things we invest in is cybersecurity. So we're looking at things like 5G and cyber and those kinds of things. It's just a wave of the future. I'll go back to what John taught me about water and economics. Water will flow to the spot it goes to. And so we're going to see 5G create things, and we're going to see this crisis create things, and then criminals are going to flow into that spot and try to take our money, and then we're going to have to flow in cyber protection to get around that. So it's, all of us should be playing this thought exercise. We got former students on the line. You are in the most exciting time in 100 years to go think about what the future is going to look like. This is probably the biggest moment to think about disruptions. What's going to happen in the disruption of CRISPR-Cas9 technology? What's going to happen to the disruption in battery technology? I mean, this unique thing that just came out in China earlier this year with batteries as a service, where you can go, you pull into a filling station and they pull your battery out and stick another battery in, like you do in your cell phone. And you pay $140 a month and your car's 10 grand cheaper. That solves one of the problems I was worried about, that if I bought a Tesla and I got behind 2 plaintiffs' attorneys on their way up north, I'd be sitting around in West Branch for 50 minutes waiting for them to get off the superchargers and drinking too many Slurpees. So, it's just that whole aspect of the change. We're seeing this massive change. CPA business is going to Uberize. The supply chain business is going to Uberize. Think about name the biggest companies. Amazon created an online bookstore and turned into the biggest retailer in the world. They didn't have anything. literally until just a few years ago, there was no such physical Amazon plant. Google created people looking stuff up. They replaced the card catalog in the library effectively, and they made $1 trillion. I mean, it's a crazy thing. Netflix replaced Blockbuster by saying, don't get us the DVD anymore. Sit on your butt at home and watch TV and never even move. I mean, it's just weird stuff. And Uber created one as, hey, you want to drive a car? Take mine. And it's, you know, Airbnb, biggest real estate company in the world, no real estate. Uber, biggest transportation company in the world, no cars. Figure that one out.
And we're living in just a tremendously disruptive world. And in some ways, you know, human nature, that's unsettling. I think it's great because, you know, think about how these ideas have changed the world we live in. And I'll relay this, you know, to kind of show how dramatic the change is. I've been in classrooms at colleges where the students will all of a sudden rail and say, you know, Amazon's not treating their workers really well and they're terrible. And then I ask, well, how many of you have bought from Amazon in the last 30 days? And like every hand goes up. It's like, do you realize that if you're going to criticize that problem, you are the problem yourself. You're giving your business to this company. You have now created it. You have ownership in that problem. But the fact of the matter is, they aren't going to change their habits.
No, they're not going to change convenience. They're not going to change convenience.
We did back to school shopping in my house and on Amazon, and it came in like 7 different boxes. I just cannot understand how they do this, but that's how they do it. On one last throwaway question on Amazon while we're talking, should the United States Postal Service be privatized?
I'm a hawk on this issue. Anything, you know, the purpose of government is to do things that the private sector can't, which is interesting because AI may eventually allow us to have AI in the courts, but that's a whole nother discussion another day. But the fact of the matter is, the private sector, I think, could handle what the U.S. Postal Service does right now and do it profitably.
I'm going to go sound a little bit like a tea partier, but it's in the Constitution, and it's a constitutional aspect that we intended at the beginning. Of course, this is back written in 1789, so it's not, you know, it's not necessarily what we need today. I think mail is a right, and so I would suggest that there are components of it clearly could be privatized, and I think it clearly could be more efficient. But just because it could be more efficient doesn't mean we should abolish the USPS. I think we could just make it better. I think clearly USPS, why? There's no reason that a governmental entity couldn't behave properly. It just doesn't want to.
Well, so I'll respectfully, of course, disagree with you.
Of course, John, because we have to respect.
Because the U.S. Postal Service at the founding provided a service that the private sector couldn't. And interestingly enough, so this is your lesson in higher ed. It's a crazy Byzantine world in its own right. But the Department of Education basically subcontracts out to accrediting agencies that are non-governmental to do accreditation in higher education. So it's actually it's interesting that you have a government agency that has decided to subcontract it out. So why maybe you keep a U.S. Postal Service, but let subcontract all its activities out to the private sector.
No, DOD
taxes.
Yeah, the DOD does subcontract, the VA does subcontract. That works it that way. But I guess I'd got to leave the sacrosanct that it's still part of the United States government. It could subcontract. I'll concede that to John. It could be.
Well, yeah, I look forward to that bourbon one of these days to continue this discussion.
John, I'm always open to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of saved the best for last there, apparently. So we'll let you guys fight that one out over bourbon sometime. But gentlemen, thank you very much for this illuminating discussion on our economy, the pandemic, our politics, our debt, and your thoughts about the future. I want to thank you both for your generosity and time and knowledge, and thank everyone here who tuned in tonight.
Chad, thank you very much for keeping us on track, and as a parting comment, again, thank you for any and all that have reached into their wallets, however modest, to help our students. It does make a difference. So thank you.
It really does. And I, again, I echo John's thoughts. A lot of our students, this is the best time in the world for them to be a student. It's the hardest time in the world for them to be a student. So if you you have the wherewithal and you can help out and join us in supporting Walsh. It's a great school and one of the best schools in the country in tax and accounting, and proud to be part of it. So, and thanks, Chad, so much for being here, taking your time off and coming in from Crane. So it's great to have you. Great chatting with you.
Yes, thank you.
Happy to do it. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.